I'm Selena Nocturne, the youngest daughter of the Nocturne family, a wealthy lineage rotting beneath its own greed and deception. Despite carrying the Nocturne name, I have always been a shadow in my own home. I'd once thought that even if I wasn't my parents' pride and joy, at the very least they would remember my birthday. But as I stepped into the grand hall of our mansion tonight, I realized how foolish that hope had been. Glittering chandeliers, the clinking of wine glasses, and a crowd of well-dressed guests laughing in the golden glow of the room. But none of it was for me. At the center of it all, on a long banquet table covered in pristine white linen, sat a lavish cake adorned with the words, "Congratulations, Cashin." Around it, the guests cheered and toasted to Cashin Nocturne, my older brother, the perfect son my parents worshipped. I stopped in my tracks. I couldn't believe it. My mother, Serafina Nocturne, looped her arm around Cassian with a look of sheer delight. "We always knew you would make it," she gushed. "Landing a position at Hawthorne and Reed is an incredible achievement." I understood now. This was never meant to be my birthday celebration. This was a party to celebrate Cassian's entry into an elite law firm on the very day of my birthday. A cold fury rose in my chest. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had erased me. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Today is my birthday." The room fell silent. Cashin turned to me, his expression flickering with something. Hesitation, annoyance, but just as quickly it smoothed into indifference. My father, Victor Nocturne, slowly set his wine glass down, his gaze sharp and unreadable. My mother's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "Selena, don't be selfish. Tonight is an important day for Cashin. Can't you be more mature about this?" I scoffed. "So what you're saying is I don't matter enough to have a day of my own?" "Stop making a scene, Selena," Cassian cut in, his voice laced with irritation. "It's just a small gathering." A small gathering. My eyes swept across the lavishly decorated hall, the hundreds of influential guests, the extravagant champagne towers. "Then where's my cake?" I asked, my gaze locking onto Serafina. She waved a dismissive hand. "There's a small one in the kitchen. If you want, I can have someone bring it out." A small one, in the kitchen, as if I were some outsider, an afterthought. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You've always been jealous of Cassian." Victor's voice suddenly rang out, low and sharp. "Instead of working hard, you spend your time complaining." I went still. They didn't just dismiss me, they truly saw me as nothing. Cashin's gaze flickered toward me again, but he remained silent. He had always chosen the easy path, the one paved with money and privilege by our parents. But they didn't see what I had. I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Tucked inside my handbag was a sealed letter from my late grandmother, Octavia Nocturne, a letter that could change everything. And if my parents knew what was written inside, they would have thought twice before treating me like this. When I returned to my room that night, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. As expected, just an hour later, I was summoned to the main hall. A suitcase stood by the front door, already packed. Victor Nocturne stood with his hands behind his back, his expression void of emotion. "I've had enough, Selena. If you refuse to respect this family, then you have no place in it." My mother folded her arms, her gaze cold. "Leave, and don't come back." Cassian stood off to the side, his posture stiff. I could tell he was uneasy, but I also knew he wouldn't defend me. I looked at them, the people who were supposed to be my family, the ones who had decided I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Then I smiled. My mother's brows furrowed. "All right," I said simply, gripping the suitcase handle. I turned on my heel and walked out of the Nocturne mansion. But as the cold night air hit my skin, I felt no fear, no regret, only a sense of clarity. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter from Grandmother Octavia. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. My eyes widened. Grandmother had left everything to me, not Cassian, not Victor, not Serafina. Everything belonged to me. I read on. My parents had forged documents to steal my inheritance. They had siphoned money meant for me to fund Cassian's education, his home, his future, while leaving me with nothing. But the most important thing, they didn't know. And I wouldn't let them find out. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I could trust, Luna Evander, my best friend. "Luna," I said, my voice steady now, "I need your help." She didn't ask why, she simply said, "Tell me what you need." I took a deep breath, gripping the letter tightly. They thought they had won, but soon they would realize they were the ones who had lost. The night air was sharp against my skin as I stepped away from the Nocturne estate, dragging my suitcase behind me. Each step on the cold pavement felt heavier, but not because of fear or grief. I wasn't broken, I wasn't lost, I was free. The truth sat securely in my bag. A letter from Grandmother Octavia, sealed in her elegant handwriting, holding a secret my parents never expected me to find. A sleek black sedan pulled up beside me, and the driver's side window rolled down. Luna Evander's face appeared, her expression tight with worry. "What the hell happened?" she demanded. I tossed my suitcase into the back seat and slid in beside her. "They threw me out." Luna let out a sharp breath. "Those bastards." She gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. "What do we do? Where do you want to go?" I reached into my bag, fingers brushing against the letter. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. "They don't know I have this," I murmured. Luna glanced at me. "What is it?" I unfolded the letter and skimmed over the words I had already read a dozen times. Grandmother left everything to me. My voice was steady, but even as I spoke the words, the weight of them settled deeper. Not Cassian, not my parents. Me. Luna's brow shot up. "Wait, everything?" "The Nocturne estate, the business, every cent she had." I swallowed. "But my parents stole it. They forged documents, rewrote her will, and used my inheritance to build Cassian's future while leaving me with nothing." Luna's grip on the wheel tightened. "Oh, we're burning them to the ground." A slow smile spread across my lips. "That's exactly what I intend to do." Luna took me to her apartment, a spacious loft filled with books, plants, and warmth. Everything my childhood home never had. I should have been exhausted, but I barely slept. Instead, I lay awake, replaying every moment from that night, every word my parents had spoken to me. I had always thought I was powerless against them. Now I realized I had been holding the strongest card all along. By sunrise, I had an appointment scheduled with Alaric Vaughn, my grandmother's longtime attorney. If anyone could confirm my suspicions and help me reclaim what was mine, it was him. Alaric's office was housed in a historic building in the city, the kind that radiated old money and silent power. When I arrived, his assistant barely glanced at me before leading me to a dimly lit room lined with bookshelves and mahogany furniture. Alaric Vaughn stood as I entered, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and calculating eyes. "Miss Nocturne," he greeted, his tone neutral. "I was wondering when you'd come." I hesitated. "You knew I'd find out." He gestured for me to sit. "Your grandmother always said that of all her descendants, you were the only one with a spine." I took a seat, my pulse steady. "Tell me everything." Alaric reached into a drawer and retrieved a thick folder, sliding it across the desk. "This contains the original will your grandmother drafted. In it, she left the Nocturne estate, the family business, and her entire financial portfolio to you." I flipped through the pages, my breath catching as I read my name over and over again in legal print. I had been right. Alaric continued, his voice sharp. "Your parents were livid when they discovered this. They manipulated the legal system, forging documents to redirect your inheritance to Cassian. They made it appear as if your grandmother had changed her mind at the last minute." I exhaled slowly. "And no one questioned it?" "I did." Alaric's expression darkened. "I tried to challenge it, but Victor Nocturne holds too much power. Every judge I approached turned a blind eye, and those who resisted were quickly bought off. Without solid evidence, my hands were tied, until now." He slid another paper toward me, a signature comparison between my grandmother's authentic will and the forged version. At first glance, they looked identical, but there was a small discrepancy in the way the letters curved. "It's subtle," he said, tapping a finger against the document. "But this is undeniable proof of fraud." I stared at the evidence, my nails digging into my palm. How much did they steal from me? Over $50 million in liquid assets, not to mention real estate and business shares. Luna let out a low whistle beside me. "That's not just fraud. That's generational theft. I closed the folder and met Alaric's gaze. If I fight this, do I win? With this evidence, easily. But if your parents realize what you're doing, they'll destroy any remaining paper trails before we can take them to court. I leaned back in my chair, processing his words. My parents would rather burn their entire empire than let me take a piece of it, which meant I needed to be careful. I needed to strike at the right moment. A thought clicked into place. What's the next big event my parents are hosting? Alaric arched a brow. The annual Nocturne family gathering at the lake house in 2 weeks. Perfect. I want every piece of evidence ready by then, I said firmly, because that's where I'm going to end them. While I was preparing my counterattack, Cassian was starting to sense that something was wrong. Back at the Nocturne estate, he entered our father's study to find Victor and Serafina engaged in a hushed conversation. She left too easily, Serafina muttered. I expected more of a fight. She has nowhere to go, Victor replied dismissively. It's over. Cassian frowned. Where's Selena? Victor barely glanced at him. Gone. Cassian's gut twisted. Gone where? She disrespected this family, Serafina snapped. She's no longer welcome here. Something about the way she said it, too casual, too final, made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Victor finally looked up, his gaze sharp. You're the heir, Cassian. You should be focused on your future, not your sister. Cassian nodded slowly, but couldn't shake the unease creeping into his thoughts. Later that night, he logged into the family's financial accounts, something he rarely did. The numbers didn't make sense. Millions of dollars had been moved to offshore accounts, hidden under shell companies. Transactions dated back to the year grandmother Octavia died. His heart pounded. He had never questioned where his money came from, never questioned why. While Selena was forced to work part-time jobs, he had his tuition, his apartment, and his investments all handed to him. Cassian closed the laptop, his hands slightly unsteady. Something was very, very wrong. Back at Luna's apartment, I watched the city lights flicker in the distance, my mind spinning with calculations. My parents would do anything to bury their crimes, but they wouldn't see me coming. I turned to Luna, my voice cold. We need to find people my parents have screwed over, people who will turn against them when the truth comes out. Luna smirked. I have a few names in mind. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was going to watch them burn. And the Nocturne family gathering, that would be their funeral. 2 weeks. That was all the time I had before the Nocturne family reunion at the lake house. A gathering where the most powerful members of my family would come together, basking in their wealth and delusions of untouchability. 2 weeks to bring their empire crumbling down. I didn't waste a second. While Alaric Vaughn worked tirelessly to compile the legal case, ensuring every document proving my parents' fraud was airtight, Luna Evander focused on a different battle, gathering allies. The Nocturnes had spent decades stepping on people to climb higher. Finding those willing to strike back wasn't difficult. The real challenge was making sure they were ready to act when the moment arrived. The first person I contacted was Talia Nocturne, my cousin. She had been promised an inheritance when she turned 18, only to have it vanish into thin air. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She wore a sharp, tailored suit, her dark eyes scrutinizing me as she stirred her espresso. You're serious about this? I slid the forged will across the table. Dead serious. Her gaze flicked over the papers before a slow smirk curved her lips. Well, it's about time someone burned the Nocturne dynasty to the ground. By the end of the week, I had secured a small but formidable group of allies, relatives who had been cheated, former employees my father had discarded like garbage, and a financial analyst who had been quietly documenting my parents' money laundering for years. Everything was falling into place, but there was one loose end I still needed to tie up. Cassian, I knew he was digging. I knew he was questioning things, but whether he would stand with me or against me was still unknown, so I sent him a message. Meet me at the docks, midnight. No explanations, no pleasantries, just a command. And at exactly midnight, Cassian showed up. His expression was guarded, his hands buried in the pockets of his expensive coat as he stepped onto the wooden pier. You're not exactly being subtle, he muttered. I crossed my arms. Neither are you. Cassian sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know you're planning something. You're not stupid enough to walk away without a fight. Funny, I said coolly. You had no problem watching me get kicked out 2 weeks ago. His jaw tightened. I didn't know. Didn't know or didn't care. Cassian hesitated, looking out over the dark water. I started looking into things, the money, the accounts. I don't have all the details, but I know something isn't right. I studied him carefully. He wasn't lying. He was confused, torn. He wasn't my enemy. Not yet. You want the truth? I asked, pulling a thick folder from my bag and tossing it at his feet. Read that, and when you're done, decide whether you're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked away, because in 1 week the Nocturne family would finally face the truth. The lake house loomed in the distance, bathed in golden candlelight, its glass windows glowing like fire against the dark water. From the outside, it looked like a dream, a place of wealth, elegance, and prestige. But I knew better. Inside those walls, secrets rotted, greed festered. And tonight, I was going to expose every single one of them. I arrived fashionably late. The party was already in full swing when I stepped through the grand entrance, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Every Nocturne in attendance turned to look at me. They hadn't expected me to show up. Victor and Serafina stood by the fireplace, wine glasses in hand, their faces carefully composed. Cassian lingered nearby, his expression unreadable. Across the room, Thalia caught my gaze and gave the smallest nod, our signal that everything was in place. I took my time, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing tray before stepping into the center of the room. Then, with a slow smile, I tapped my glass against a silver tray, the sharp chime cutting through the chatter. Conversations died down. Eyes turned toward me. Perfect. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, my voice smooth, effortless. Victor's smile faltered. Selena, this isn't the time. I ignored him. It's a special night after all, I continued, pacing slowly, a celebration of family, of legacy, of power. I let the last word hang in the air before turning to face my parents directly. So let's talk about what it took to build that power, shall we? Serafina stiffened. Selena, sit down. Why, because you're afraid of what I might say? I tilted my head, amusement flickering in my voice. Or is it because you already know that your little house of cards is about to collapse? Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, intrigued. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of neatly bound documents. I held them up for everyone to see. This, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, is the original, legally binding will of Octavia Nocturne, the one my parents forged and destroyed so they could steal my inheritance. A gasp rippled through the room. Victor's face darkened. That's enough. I took a step closer, my voice unwavering. Oh, I'm just getting started. I turned to the guests, flipping through the pages. The Nocturnes love to talk about loyalty, about strength, about legacy. But here's the truth. Our parents built their empire by lying, stealing, and bleeding this family dry. I tossed the stack onto a nearby table, letting the pages scatter like fallen leaves. They funneled millions into offshore accounts. They stole from their own blood. They lied to all of you. Chaos erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. Serafina stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. You ungrateful little... Careful, I cut in smoothly. Everything you say is being recorded. Her mouth snapped shut. Victor turned to Cassian, his voice sharp. Tell me you don't believe this. Cassian was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he looked at me and nodded. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my chest. Serafina was trembling now, gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. This is a family matter. No one else needs to know. I tilted my head. Oh, but they already do. At that moment, the doors swung open. Alaric stepped in, followed by 2 men in dark suits, police. Serafina's face drained of color. Victor took a step back, eyes darting toward the nearest exit. Too late. You should have been more careful, I murmured. Lies have a way of catching up with you. And as my parents were led away in handcuffs, I stood amidst the chaos, champagne flute still in hand. I had won, and this was only the beginning. The morning after the Nocturne family reunion, the world felt different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. The headlines came fast. Victor and Serafina Nocturne arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Heirs of the Nocturne dynasty face financial ruin. A legacy in flames, how the Nocturne empire collapsed overnight. I sat at the breakfast table in Luna's apartment, flipping through article after article. The media had descended on the Nocturnes like vultures, tearing apart the legacy my parents had spent decades crafting. Investors were pulling out, clients were severing ties. The people who had once begged for my parents' favor were now scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. And yet, despite all the destruction, I felt strangely calm. "Your parents' legal team is trying to delay the case," Alaric said over the phone, "but with the amount of evidence we have, it's not looking good for them." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Good. They'll fight this, Selena. You need to be prepared for a long legal battle. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I've been fighting my whole life, Alaric. What's a few more months?" Luna walked in, tossing a newspaper onto the table with a smirk. "Looks like Cassian's making his move." I glanced at the headline. "Cassian Nocturne breaks silence. I won't defend my parents' crimes." I wasn't surprised. Cassian had spent his entire life believing in the Nocturne empire, upholding the illusion of power and prestige. But last night, he had finally seen the truth. Still, I wasn't sure where he stood. So when my phone buzzed with an incoming message from him, I hesitated before opening it. "Cassian, we need to talk. Meet me at the estate." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Me, fine, 1 hour." The Nocturne estate felt like a ghost town when I arrived. Reporters swarmed the gates, cameras flashing as I stepped out of my car. Inside, the house was eerily silent. The grand chandeliers still shone, the marble floors still gleamed, but the air was thick with something new. Emptiness. Cassian stood in the grand foyer, his posture tense, hands in his pockets. "You actually came," he said, studying me. "You asked," I replied. For a long moment, we just stood there, two survivors of a fallen empire. "I didn't know," Cassian finally said, his voice quieter than I expected. "I didn't know how deep it went." I folded my arms. "But you knew enough, and you still stood by them." His jaw tightened. "I thought I was protecting the family." "No," I said simply. "You were protecting yourself." Cassian flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he let out a slow breath and raked a hand through his hair. "I want to fix this," he said. "I don't want the Nocturne name to be remembered as a stain. I want to rebuild it the right way." I arched a brow. "And you think I'm going to help you do that? You're the rightful heir, Selena." He met my gaze. "The company, the estate, it was all meant to be yours." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Now you suddenly care about what's right? I know I don't deserve your trust," Cassian admitted, "but I am asking for a chance." Silence stretched between us. I had spent my whole life being cast aside, ignored and betrayed. And yet, standing there in that hollow mansion, I realized something. Cassian wasn't my enemy. Not anymore. But he wasn't my ally either. Not yet. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "If you want a chance, Cassian, you're going to have to earn it." He nodded. "Then let me." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. For now, this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming what was mine. And I wasn't done yet. A week later, I stood in front of a place I hadn't visited in years. The Nocturne Lake House. The same house where I had destroyed my parents' carefully curated legacy. But I wasn't here for the past. I was here for something Grandmother Octavia left behind. Alaric had called me that morning with a revelation. "Your grandmother didn't just leave you the family fortune, she left you something else. Something bigger." I had to see it for myself. The air was crisp as I walked up the stone pathway. The house had been locked up since the scandal, its grand doors untouched. But I had the keys. As I stepped inside, memories washed over me. Laughter by the fireplace, the scent of old books, my grandmother's warm hand on my shoulder. Alaric was already inside, waiting for me in the study. "I assume you're ready?" he asked. "Just show me." He led me to a hidden panel in the library, pressing a latch behind one of the bookshelves. With a soft click, the wall shifted, revealing a sealed vault. My breath caught. Inside were original documents, untouched by my parents' corruption, deeds, accounts, letters, proof of everything they had tried to bury. But what stood out most was a handwritten letter from Grandmother Octavia. I picked it up with careful hands, unfolding the delicate parchment. My dearest Selena, if you are reading this, then you have found the truth. I always knew you would. This family has been built on power, but power without integrity is worthless. I saw the darkness in your parents long ago, which is why I chose you, not because of blood, not because of obligation, but because I see in you something they never had, strength without corruption. This is my true gift to you, not money, not a name, but the freedom to decide what kind of nocturne you want to be. Destroy the legacy or rebuild it in your own image. The choice is yours. With love, Octavia Nocturne. I exhaled slowly, my grip on the letter tightening. For so long I had fought for what was mine, driven by revenge, by the need to see my parents fall. But this was bigger than them. This wasn't just about taking back my inheritance. This was about deciding what came next. I glanced at Alaric. What do you think she meant? He smiled slightly. I think she was leaving you a choice, to follow in their footsteps or to forge something entirely new. I looked around the study, my mind racing. I had won. But now I had to decide what to do with that victory, and for the first time in my life, the future was truly mine to shape. 6 months later, the Nocturne name still stood, but it wasn't the same. The Nocturne estate was gone. The towering gates had been torn down, replaced by something new, a community center built from the wealth my parents once hoarded for themselves. The Nocturne Corporation had been restructured from the ground up. Corrupt board members were removed. The stolen money was redirected. It wasn't about power anymore, it was about something better. Cassian had kept his word. He had stepped back, letting me lead. Luna had stayed by my side, just as she always had, the one person who had never doubted me. And Victor and Serafina, they were still fighting their legal battles, their once mighty empire reduced to court hearings and frozen accounts. I had thought revenge would feel sweeter, but standing in my father's old office, now mine, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about winning. A knock on the door broke my thoughts. I looked up. Cassian stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me carefully. You ready? He asked. I glanced around the office, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass windows. I smiled, more than ever. And just like that, I closed the last chapter of the old Nocturne dynasty and began something new.